I'm not just some crazy girl. You'll believe me if you just take a moment and see the leech the way I saw it. I know you will. Just listen. It started when I was in Japan. I've been living with a host family for a few months, and my semester abroad was almost over. I had the nerve to believe I'd begun to acclimate, that I understood their culture and could call myself one of them. On more than a few nights gathered around the fire, they told me their superstitions and scary stories. Their myths were very different from the ones I'd grown up with, and I found them fascinating, but not scary. And they were different too. There was a heavy emphasis on choice. Rather than facing a mindless slasher that simply wanted to kill you, many Japanese horror stories involved entities approaching an unwary victim in a public place and giving them a choice. If the victim answered one way, they would be killed horribly in a specific manner. If the victim took the other choice, they would be killed horribly in another specific manner. These unwinnable situations made me laugh until the father of my host family explained to me, in quiet tones, the true subtext. It was all about the third option. It was all about the innate fear of customs in a very traditional society. The only way to survive was to simply know the acceptable third answer and give that one instead. He squeezed my arm and told me that I, as a foreigner, stood no chance of knowing the third answer. If I saw someone approaching me in public, no matter how innocent it seemed, I was to run away before they could speak and give me that fatal choice. I smiled and laughed it off, but his warning made me shiver a few times over the last few days. As a girl alone in another country, I was already on guard while walking through public spaces, but the towering maze of Tokyo took on a gray and tense tone whenever I thought of what might lurk in the crowds. I stuck to paths that went through the many hidden gardens and parks, and I always looked around warily. That fear faded, though. I can't tell you why exactly. I was young. I thought I was smart, and I was American. Nothing could really hurt me. And besides, I was one of them now, right? I'd spent months there living like they did. So, on my last day, when a woman began walking intently toward me from the opposite end of a long subway car, I stayed in my seat. She had long black hair, beautiful dark eyes, and a dark green dress that seemed out of place in a crowded car otherwise filled with gray shirts, dark suits, and white blouses. I saw these details about her before I saw the deep scars on her face and hands, as if a maniacal American slasher had brutally carved her up and left her to die some years ago. As she shuffled toward me, the lights flickered once. The boy in the seat next to me shivered and focused worriedly on his portable game. Adults looked away, tense, and the teenager opposite me finally stopped talking and began staring at their shoes. They knew. They knew, and there was nothing any of them could or would do for me. I was a foreigner and a stranger to them. But they listened. Oh, did they listen? I could almost hear them straining their ears to hear her whispers over the keening of wheels on rails beneath us. Every small step the woman took seemed louder than the one before. Even then, I still didn't believe. I thought it was a prank or someone being strange. I thought the others in the car with me were turning away out of courtesy or disgust at her scars. When I saw a tear fall from the cheek of the boy next to me, when I saw it splatter onto his game screen while he continued to pretend to play, that's when I understood. She stood directly above me, and I raised my eyes to meet hers. Her scars crinkled horribly as she gave me a seemingly innocent smile, and she asked in a pleasant but whispery voice, "Do you have a sister?" I froze. If I said yes, what would happen? If I said no, what else would happen? When the lights flickered again, and her face moved without moving right down close to mine, I almost panicked and told her the truth. Inches away from me, her smile widened. She turned her head slowly, horribly slowly, until her neck reached a 90-degree angle. On the verge of passing out from fright, I forced myself to start breathing again. Her smile turned into an angry frown. I cowered back against the person behind me, who shrieked. The scarred woman in green began to reach for me, but the car came to a smooth stop, the doors open, and I dodged around her and ran out with the crowd. To their credit, none screamed. They simply hurried off to their various destinations while attempting to seem like nothing was wrong. Nobody wanted to draw attention to themselves. Nobody wanted to get noticed by the woman in green or by polite society. I ran all the way to my host's family's house, but nobody was home. It was my last day, and we'd already said our goodbyes, but it still felt odd that they were gone. Still trembling, I took a taxi to the airport, made my flight, and tried to rationalize the encounter away. The only hint I had that it had even happened was a small cut on my upper arm where she had nearly grabbed me with her horrible long nails, a cut that had, strangely, already begun to heal into a scar. Hours into my international flight, I finally began to calm down, and I even started feeling a bit smug. Not only had I survived an encounter with a Japanese horror entity, I'd even managed to immediately take a flight straight the hell out of the entire country. I would not end up as another unwitting cautionary tale. I was a born and bred American girl that had seen every horror movie under the sun, and I'd made all the right decisions. Awesome. I told the story to a guy sitting next to me on my flight, and he asked, "What if she shows up here on the plane? Where will you run?" Yeah, I shut up right about then, and stayed tense for the next few hours. Eventually, though, I realized I would be doomed no matter what if the woman in the green dress showed up here, so I finally gave in and slept. Awake or asleep, it didn't matter. My neighboring guy woke me up before we landed, joked that he'd kept guard, and reported that nobody had come for me while I'd been out. Half-heartedly thanking him, I made polite conversation, left the plane, got my stuff, and met my parents outside the airport. It was bright, sunny, and open here, and it was a relief to be back home. This was the land of simple horrors, of gory violence, zombies, and haunted locations. The scarred woman in the green dress would have no power here, if indeed she existed at all. I was talkative and happy on the ride home, and my parents were glad to see me. I didn't tell them about my horrible encounter, because it honestly slipped from my mind. Everything was good. I was safe. We pulled up to the house where I'd grown up, and it looked exactly like I'd remembered. Only a few months had gone by, true, but it felt like a lifetime ago. Lugging in my stuff alongside my dad, I began to recount some funny memory that had come to mind when I entered the front door, turned toward the kitchen, and saw her standing there. Green dress, scars, smile and all, the woman from the subway car thousands of miles distant stood waiting for me in my childhood home. She gave me that same eerie smile and lifted a large knife. I screamed and dropped my bags. Startled, my father dropped his too, and my mother rushed in from outside. The woman in green brought the knife down. She raised it, then brought it down again, chopping vegetables. Mistaking my reaction, my mother began screaming with me, but happily, and she pulled me forward. "It's good to see your sister again, isn't it?" Suddenly, I was forced into a hug with both my mother and the woman in green. But instead of trying to hurt me, the horrible stranger just smiled. "It's good to see you, sis." I pulled away, trembling forcefully. I immediately sensed that something was off, and I'd seen enough movies to know to keep my cards close to my chest. "Mom, what's going on?" "What do you mean, honey?" she asked, smiling happily at both of us before moving deeper into the kitchen to help cook. The scarred woman in green kept her gaze and neutral smile fixated on me as I moved away from her, around the kitchen island and toward my mother. "Why is she here?" "Who?" "Her." I returned the woman's stare. My mother laughed. "You've been away too long, dear. You remember that your sister's graduated and back from college now." I gulped. Humor me, Mom. Why doesn't she look like us? My father came down the stairs, returning from dropping off my bags, and gave me a blank look. I thought we were past this. It's not nice to keep harping on your sister for being adopted. Horrified, I took a step back and bumped into the fridge. But how? Oh, I guess I'm just super jet-lagged. Sorry, I was just trying to remember when that was, for a birthday present for her and all. My father sighed. Same day you were born. He stepped out to get more bags from the car. I turned away, mortified. My sister never took her gaze off of me, almost taunting me with her expressionless invasion. As we both stood there, facing off silently, she lifted her knife and brought it down, on her own arm, right along one of her scars. She didn't flinch. Instead, I did. Gripping my arm and looking down, I saw the skin slice open, bleed, heal, and fade into a scar in moments. Aghast, I looked at her and saw the equivalent cut disappearing from her arm. Her smile grew a little wider. I opened my mouth to scream something with fury, but the scarred woman lifted a knife and pointed at my mother's back. The implication was clear. The best I could do was to take the knife from her by offering to cook and insisting that my sister sit down at the table and relax. She did so, apparently willing to play a social game of cat and mouse. As I chopped up vegetables and stared at the scar on my arm, my thoughts raced. This entity had somehow attached itself to my life. Looking around at pictures in the kitchen, I saw her in photographs that I recognized. Family photos that now included her, as a child, as a teenager, as a woman, scarred from the outset. I kept my eyes on her as she sat at the table, and she stared right back at me the entire time. Her disfigured smile never once changed. We actually sat down and had dinner as a family. My parents didn't seem to notice that my sister never spoke unless directly addressed, and even then only with perfect politeness. She ate little and kept her eyes always on me. Halfway through dinner, I got angry and slammed my fist on the table. She took her dinner knife and drew it across her cheek. I fought hard not to scream as I felt my face split open, bleed, and then heal. I already knew there would be a scar, but I excused myself to go to the bathroom and look for myself. Once there, it occurred to me that the leech, a leech on my life, time, and soul, seemed to be punishing me for rudeness. I remember saying to the mirror, "All right, you bitch, I'll play your game." I just needed time to figure out. Another slice opened up near my ear, bled, and quickly healed over into a scar. She'd heard me from the dining room, or she could hear me no matter what. Walking carefully back into the dining room, I put on my best graces and sat with a smile. I couldn't think about the scars. Were they permanent? Would I live the rest of my life disfigured? Plastic surgery might fix a few, but if this kept going, no. I would just have to be polite and proper until I could figure out how to destroy her. I volunteered to help clean up dinner and do the dishes, and my mother seemed surprised, saying that my time in Japan had done me good. I didn't know what she meant by that, but I managed to get through the evening without any further scars. That night, I tried to whisper to my father in the dark, but he didn't understand what I meant, and I earned another scar on my arm. I slipped downstairs and into her room. My sister sat holding a knife to her arm and grinning wider than I'd ever seen. "What do you want?" I asked her. She held the knife higher on her arm, just above a clear patch of skin where her scars had left her and been transferred to me. "Do you have a sister?" Suddenly remembering the moment of mortal threat in the subway car, I said nothing. She didn't cut herself, but she did wait, always staring, ever staring. I backed out and went to my own bedroom, where I laid stressed for hours. I did sleep eventually, but only because jet lag forced me into it. The next few days were filled with terribly costly chess moves. I invited over old friends to see if they recognized her as my sister, and they did. For each of these conversations with confused friends, I earned another scar. The leech knew what I was trying to do, and she disapproved. The worst part was running into an ex-boyfriend and finding out that he didn't remember our relationship. After much pressure, he finally admitted, "I liked your personality, but I didn't ask you out because of your scars. Sorry." I remember screaming and earning another scar for it. Rushing home, I looked at old yearbook pictures. The scars weren't just appearing now, they were appearing back then too. I'd always had them. That same ex-boyfriend would later remember asking out my sister instead. The leech was draining away my life right before my eyes. What would happen when she ran out of scars and I had them all? I couldn't talk to my parents. I couldn't talk to my friends. I shut myself in my room and spent each day alone to avoid any further social improprieties. I've been raised American, raised rude, proud, and free, and I kept making mistakes. It was in me to swear, to nettle, and to tease, and the cost was just too high. My host family's father had been right. I was losing because I was from the wrong culture. Had I been a traditional and proper Japanese girl, the leech might never have punished me, even once. The leech existed to punish deviants. The leech fed off of outsiders, rebels, and bad children. The leech was part of me now. She only had a few scars left when the idea came to me. She had this huge asinine grin all the time now, and stood in my room while I slept, staring at me, basically daring me to say something rude. She held a knife over me while I slept. Yes, but it was not to cut me. It was to cut herself. And that's what gave me the idea. Furious and desperate beyond description, I decided that I wanted my life back at any cost. I've been thinking of the leech in two ways. I could avoid being rude and live under her threat for the rest of my life, or I could be myself and find out what punishment awaited once all the scars had been inflicted upon me. I feared the second option. I was terrified. When the leech became clear and beautiful, and I became horrid and mishappen, what would she do to me? Would she kill me? Discard me when I stopped being useful? Would I cease to exist altogether? Would my life completely become hers? I've been so afraid of that second option, it took me until she only had one scar left to remember what my benefactor had said. There was a third option, one unknowable to any but the most socially integrated, and I had enough time to see that, for the leech, the social game went both ways. We were not in Japan. We were in America. Here, victims got tough when the end was nigh. She was with me always then. She walked directly behind me, goading me, irritating me, pushing me with her silence and her grin. Oh, that perfect smile and that beautiful face. It mocked me. I stood in the kitchen with her, and I drew out the same knife she had been holding when I'd first come home and found her attached to my life and timeline like the horrific leech she was. I smiled at her, matching her expression, and I brought the knife down before she could react. Not on her, on myself. I slashed open my arm, and blood splattered across the kitchen island. She gasped and pulled back, her hair hiding her face. I saw her clutch her arm, and I saw a scar appear in the equivalent place where I had slashed myself. I wasn't healing, but I had actually managed to injure her. I thought long and hard about it. Cutting her would only mean cutting myself, but cutting myself meant cutting her. I slashed again, this time on my face. She screamed. Finally, God, I'd long prayed to hear that noise from her. I slashed again on my leg, and she fell to her knees. My blood splattered across her green dress, soiling it, and I slashed myself again and again and again. I fell faint. and still I cut myself, turning my arms, legs, face, and tummy into oozing mincemeat and gobs of flesh. With each strike, she screamed louder and crumpled further. I fell to my knees before her, a wall of pain and ebbing gore, and I smiled at her as her scream reached a crescendo that soared into nothingness. With a last gasp, she shrank and blackened until she became nothing more than a grasping little animal, an actual leech. Without a person to latch onto, she was nothing but a worm. With the last of my strength, I stood up and stomped on her. It was over. I called 911 after that, of course, and, equally as expected, you think I'm crazy, but you have to listen. She was real, but she's gone now, and I'm not going to do this again. I killed her. I know I'll be scarred all over, just like she was, but at least I'll get to live. I'll get to swear, I'll get to drink, I'll get to... Remorse? For what? Why are you asking me that question? Find the guy on the plane. He'll tell you what I told him. No way he'd forget. You're not hearing me. Find anyone who was on the subway that day, in my car. They'll teach you. Why do you keep saying that? Stop asking me that question. She was a leech. She took everything that should have been mine. If she'd just never been adopted, it would have been my life. That would have been my friends, my boyfriend, my prom date. She was always there, always in my goddamn house, always so much better than me, always mocking me with that beautiful face. I don't have a sister.
I was lucky enough to be born on an island just off of Japan called Okinawa. I attended public school, and while many of the years were great, there was one horrible night that I would never forget. At the time, I was only 11 years old, and my class was going through Japanese history, and we happened to come across a creepy story about a forest on the mainland called the Okigahara Forest, or better known today as the Suicide Forest. Our teacher filled our heads with horrific stories of the mainland and how we were lucky to live on post at Camp Henson. As the son of a Marine, I lived on post with the other military brats. Although we had our teacher and our ear telling us how lucky we were, we all had horror stories of our own. But there was one story that we told that frightened even the bravest of us. The demon in the woods. Just off post was a large forest that at the time the military left alone. The kids in my class had come up with a story that not even the Marines would dare enter the forest, in fear that they would be killed by the demon, and their bodies would be dragged out into the woods to be devoured and never seen again. I, of course, believed this to be bull. I called out those kids, Martin Fox and James Pruitt, telling them that they were full of it, and that nothing was in those woods except the animals that lived there. Well, of course, Martin and James didn't like being called liars, so they said, "Oh yeah? How do you know?" And I said that Marines aren't afraid of anything, and that one would be more than enough to handle an army of demons. I thought this mostly because one of my dad's favorite sayings was, "Regroup hell," so I figured that if they would regroup in hell, surely they wouldn't be afraid of any demon, right? James busted out with the mother of all challenges. "Prove it. I triple dog dare you to go into the woods." He completely skipped the double dog dare, the bastard. So of course, I had to accept. It was only walking into the woods. So I agreed, but Martin wasn't done. He added the stipulation that it had to be at night. Late at night. I couldn't very well back down now, so I agreed to their terms. I waited until my parents were fast asleep, and I hopped on my Huffy and rode out to the meeting place off post. I was silently hoping that Martin and James would chicken out, but to my dismay, there they were, waiting, flashlights and all. When I rode up, I hopped off my bike and held out my hand for one of their flashlights. "No flashlights. You have to go in the dark," James said. "That's not part of the dare," I protested, half wanting to chicken out of the whole thing. "Chicken," Martin responded, adding a few clucks and waving of his arms. Screw these guys, I thought. So I let my bike hit the road, and I marched off into the woods, listening to their jeers from behind. "Don't forget 100 steps," Martin yelled. I didn't respond, and just clicked my teeth and made my way into the forest, step after step. The brush was pretty thick, and after a while, I couldn't even make out the glow of their flashlights behind me. The treetops blocked the moonlight, so it was almost pitch black. So I just kept walking until I hit that 100 steps, and silently congratulated myself. My success would be short-lived. I spotted what looked like a white flash out of the corner of my eye, and I immediately turned, fully expecting to spot Martin or James trying to scare me. "I know that's you guys," I called out. But there was no response. I stood quietly for a moment, hoping to spot one of them make the mistake of using the flashlight again, but nothing came. That's when I heard it, the sound of a twig breaking directly behind me. I turned around to try and catch the bastards, but what I felt wasn't a small kid, but a huge figure towering over me. "You smoke," a voice whispered in the dark, breaking the silence. His voice sent chills down my spine. I wasn't going to stick around to find out who or what said that. I turned and booked it. I ran as fast as I could, not looking back, hoping that I wasn't going to be followed. I ended up tripping and knocking myself out. Cliché, I know, but it was pitch black. The next thing I know, I start to regain consciousness, and I can feel myself being dragged by my feet. I couldn't move. I couldn't cry out. I couldn't do anything. I was solely at the mercy of whatever it was that was dragging me along, and I lost consciousness again. The next time I opened my eyes, it was the sun rising that greeted me. I sat up and realized that I was sitting in my front yard. I looked around and couldn't figure out how I had gotten there. Martin and James probably dragged me back, so I just ran inside and got ready for school. I decided it was best not to let my parents know that I had snuck out, in fear of the whooping I would probably get. When I got to school, Martin and James were crying to our teacher, Mrs. Day, that I was taken by the demon, and when I walked in the classroom, they were absolutely shocked to see me there. It was at that moment that I realized that they weren't the ones who brought me home. So how the hell did I end up back on post? Who knew where I lived? It wasn't until many years later that I overheard my dad telling my nephew a horror story about Camp Henson. An old World War II Marine that had been killed in battle roamed the base at night, and sometimes he would approach people and say, "Got a light?" And after getting his cigarette lit, he would vanish into thin air. When I heard that story, I knew how I got home.
A 19-year-old girl was attending university in Japan. In her second year of study, she decided that she wanted to improve her English, so she transferred to a university in the United States. She had always wanted to live in the USA, but she did not anticipate how difficult the change would be for her. The course she was studying required her to submit a lot of reports. While she was attending the university in Japan, she submitted all her reports in Japanese. However, in the American university, all of the reports had to be in English. This caused a big problem for the girl because her command of the English language was not very good. She found that she had to spend hours upon hours checking the spelling and grammar while typing up her reports. Another problem was that she didn't own a laptop. Luckily, the university library had a computer lab with approximately 50 computers that was open 24 hours a day. Unfortunately, there were always long queues of people waiting to use them. Every morning, she had to attend lectures, and every evening, she had to queue for a computer. This all took its toll, and after a while, the girl became fed up with the daily grind. Late one night, after the Japanese girl had been sitting hunched over a computer for hours, she began to get restless. It was almost 2 a.m. and she was extremely tired. It was getting difficult for her to keep her eyes open. Leaning back in her chair, she yawned and stretched out her arms in front of her. Her fingers happened to nudge the computer keyboard aside. She was about to begin typing again when she happened to glance down and noticed that there was something scratched into the desk under the keyboard. It seemed to be an internet URL. She thought it was odd that someone had taken the time to engrave a website address in the wood, and out of a combination of curiosity and boredom, she decided to look it up. After typing the website address into the browser, she waited a few seconds and a page appeared on the screen. What she saw horrified her. There was a picture of a man covered in blood lying on the floor of a dimly lit room. It looked so real that it turned her stomach and made her feel like throwing up. Looking closely, she saw a caption below the image. It read, "Dumb guy aged around 30, killed by me today." A chill went down her spine as she stared at the gruesome picture. The girl immediately shut down her computer and, grabbing her handbag, she hurried out of the computer lab. She returned to her dorm room alone and spent the night tossing and turning in bed. The horrible photo she had seen was never far from her mind. Could it be real? She asked herself. Maybe it's just a hoax. People post crazy pictures on the internet all the time. The web is full of weird and disturbing websites. Try as she might, the girl couldn't shake the sneaking suspicion that she had stumbled across the website of a murderer. Worst of all, he seemed to be boasting about his crime. The next morning after breakfast, her curiosity got the better of her. She skipped her first lecture and headed straight for the computer labs. When she found a free computer, she sat down, typed in the URL, and held her breath. Perhaps what she had seen last night was just her imagination. When the website appeared, she saw that the image had changed. Instead of a dead body in a dimly lit room, the photo showed a blonde woman walking down a busy street. The girl breathed a sigh of relief. The picture appeared to have been taken from a distance, and the woman seemed unaware that she was being photographed. The caption underneath read, "Stupid woman, around 25 years old." That evening, the girl went back to her dorm room and didn't speak to anyone. She was still unnerved and couldn't stop thinking about the strange website. As soon as she woke up the next morning, she dressed and went back to the computer lab. There was hardly anyone around. She sat down at a free computer and typed in the website URL. To her horror, the image had changed again. It was the same dimly lit room, but this time a blonde woman lay on the floor. Blood was flowing from her nose and mouth. There was a large knife sticking out of her chest. Under the photo were the words, "Stupid woman, around 25 years old, killed by me today." The girl was horrified and immediately contacted the police. Over the phone, it was difficult for her to explain the situation. Her English was not very good, and she spent a long time repeating herself and trying to find the right words to describe what she had found. In the end, she wasn't even sure if the police had understood what she was trying to say. However, they took her name, address, phone number, and the URL of the website. When she hung up the phone, the girl was shaking. She couldn't seem to get the awful pictures out of her mind. She had to take another look. That evening, she returned to the computer lab again and, with mixed feelings of fear and curiosity, she entered the URL of the website. When the page loaded, she discovered that the image that had been there just a few hours before was gone. Instead, there was a picture of a girl taken from behind. She had short black hair, a lime green t-shirt, and was sitting in front of a computer. The girl got a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach, and she broke out into a cold sweat. She recognized the hair. She recognized the clothes. She was staring at a picture of herself. Her name, address, and phone number were written under the picture, followed by a single sentence: "You are my next internet star." The Japanese girl ran out of the computer lab and went straight back to her dorm room. She packed up her belongings, and by the next morning, she was on a flight back to Japan. She never returned to the United States again.
One of my relatives passed away suddenly. I never met the woman. She had a daughter who was 4 years old. The little girl's name was Yuki. Her father wasn't able to raise her on his own, so he asked my aunt to care for her. The little girl refused to be left alone and never left my aunt's side. It started to become a problem. My aunt couldn't go anywhere without Yuki. She constantly needed attention. Even my aunt's own daughter started to get jealous. One day, my aunt told me she had to go out of town for a couple of days and asked if I would babysit the little girl for her. I said it would be my pleasure. I lived alone and I could do with some company. A few days later, my aunt dropped Yuki off in my apartment. As she was leaving, she took the little girl aside and said, "Yuki, please be good. Behave yourself." When my aunt was gone, I tried to talk to Yuki and play some games with her, but the little girl's behavior was very strange. She had a teddy bear tucked tightly under her arm and would never let go of it. She never smiled, she never spoke. All she ever did was sit quietly in the corner and stare at the wall. It made me kind of uneasy. I was trying to find something that would entertain her. I had just bought a new digital camera and decided to let Yuki play with my old one. When she saw the camera, her eyes lit up. I showed her how to use it and she went all around my apartment, taking pictures of everything. There was a bright smile on her face. That evening, I discovered how difficult Yuki was to deal with. Whenever I tried to leave the room, she started crying and screaming out my name. I couldn't leave her alone or she would create a huge fuss. She even insisted on going with me to the bathroom, which was very embarrassing. At bedtime, she refused to stay in the spare room and insisted on sleeping in my bed. I read her a bedtime story and after a while, I managed to get her to go to sleep. But that was when I noticed her teddy bear. One of its legs was charred and blackened, as if it had been burned. It made me wonder. In the middle of the night, I was awoken by a strange noise. When I turned over, I saw that there was something wrong with Yuki. The little girl's body was trembling and shaking. Her eyes were wide open. Her teeth were chattering and tears were streaming down her cheeks. I held her close and asked her what was wrong. "She's looking at me again," she mumbled. "Who is?" I asked in surprise. "The dark woman," replied Yuki. She wouldn't say anything more. I tried to tell her it was just her imagination, but she kept shaking her head and whimpering. It took me a long time to get her to go back to sleep. The next day, Yuki was fine again. She loved playing with my digital camera. When it was time for her to go home, I told her she could keep it. Yuki hugged me. Although she didn't say anything, I could tell she was overjoyed. I dropped the little girl off at my aunt's house and stayed to have a cup of tea. My aunt thanked me for taking care of Yuki, and we spent a while chatting at the kitchen table. "Poor little thing," said my aunt. "She hasn't said a word since her mother died." I couldn't contain my curiosity. "How did Yuki's mom die?" I asked. A strange look came over my aunt's face. "She died in a fire." "How did the fire start?" I asked. "Well," my aunt hesitated, unwilling to talk about it. "It's a very sad story. She committed suicide. Yuki's mother was a very troubled woman. She poured gasoline over herself and lit a match. She burned herself alive. "Oh my God," I exclaimed. "How horrible." "Yes," said my aunt. Her family was so shocked. They hushed it up and pretended it was an accident. We had a small funeral, but only close relatives were invited. Yuki wasn't there. She doesn't even know her mother is dead. She thinks her mother is just on a long holiday. We haven't had the heart to tell her the truth. "Poor Yuki," I murmured. My aunt nodded her head sadly. Poor Yuki. A few days after that, Yuki died. My aunt was trying to change Yuki's behavior. At night, she forced the little girl to sleep in her own bedroom. Even though Yuki screamed and cried, my aunt left her there alone and locked the door. In the morning, she found Yuki lying motionless in bed, and the poor little girl was dead. Nobody could understand what had happened. The coroner could not determine the cause of death. There wasn't a mark on her body. She was perfectly healthy. She had just mysteriously died during the night. There was no explanation. After the funeral, I went back to my aunt's house. Everyone was very sad. She returned the digital camera I had given to Yuki. I took it home with me. It was something to remember her by. The memory card was full of random photos that Yuki had taken. I browsed through them, wiping a tear away from my eye. There were pictures of my apartment, pictures of my aunt's house, flowers, dogs, toys, candy, silly pictures that a child would take. Then, I came to the last picture, and it made my blood run cold. My hands were trembling. I wanted to scream, but nothing would come out. The timestamp on the photo showed that it had been taken the night Yuki died. Here is the last picture that poor little girl ever took with my digital camera.
Futa Kuchiona, or the Two-Mouthed Woman, is a Japanese urban legend about a woman who is cursed with having two mouths, one normal mouth at the front, and another, hidden, monstrous mouth in the back of her head. Futa Kuchiona is a monstrous woman with a tiny mouth. However, on the back of her head, hidden beneath her hair, she has a huge second mouth. The woman's skull splits apart, revealing lips, teeth, and a tongue. Although she appears to never eat, the mouth in the back of her head is ravenous and consumes huge quantities of food. They say that the big mouth has a mind of its own and speaks to the woman, mumbling spiteful and threatening things to her. The mouth will harass the woman and threaten her, demanding food. It will screech obsessively and cause the woman tremendous pain until it is fed. The monstrous mouth can also control the woman's hair, making it snake out like tentacles, grabbing food and shoveling it down its throat. There is some disagreement in Japan as to Futa Kuchiona's origins and how she got her second mouth. One story from Japanese folklore tells of an old miser who lived by himself in a small village. He never got married because he hated spending money. He thought that if he took a wife, he would have to pay for her food, and he could not bear the idea of parting with his wealth. It so happened that he came across a young woman who did not eat a thing and immediately asked her to marry him because she seemed to never eat and was a hard worker. The old miser was thrilled that he had found the woman of his dreams, and the couple were very happy together. However, he began to wonder why his stores of rice were steadily decreasing. One day, the man pretended to leave for work, but instead stayed behind to spy on his wife. To his horror, he saw his wife's hair part on the back of her head, her skull split wide open, revealing a gaping, deformed mouth. Her hair reached out like tentacles, grasping handfuls of rice and shoveling it into its monstrous mouth. When the woman noticed her husband had discovered her secret, she attacked him and tried to strangle him. He managed to get away and hid in the mountains. Weeks later, When he worked up the courage to return, he found the woman had gone, and all of his stores of rice had been eaten. The old man never married again. In another story, a man's wife died, leaving him with a daughter to care for. The man remarried, but his new wife was a very mean and vindictive person. Together, they had a second child, another daughter. However, they were poor, and there was barely enough food to go around. The new wife decided to keep her own daughter fed while she starved the other girl. The man's daughter eventually died of starvation. Not long afterwards, the man was out in the garden chopping wood for the fire. He accidentally swung his axe incorrectly and embedded it in the back of his wife's head. There was a lot of blood, and he expected the woman to die. She survived, but the open wound never healed. Instead, it formed into a huge, drooling mouth, complete with teeth and a tongue. The woman was in tremendous pain, and the only way to make it stop was to feed the deformed mouth. It demanded more and more food to keep it satisfied. Eventually, the mouth started making sounds and started talking. One day, while the woman was asleep, the hideous mouth spoke to her husband and confessed, "I am cursed because I killed your daughter by starving her to death."
Kun is described as an unidentifiable white squiggle moving back and forth in the distance. Nobody knows exactly what it looks like, because anyone who has seen it has lost their mind. One Japanese man tells an encounter he had as a child with a kun. When I was young, my parents brought my older brother and I to visit my grandmother and grandfather. We didn't see her very much, because she lived very far out the countryside in Akita. As soon as we arrived at our grandparents' house, my brother and I went out to play. The air was much fresher and cleaner than it was in the city. We walked through the rice fields, enjoying the wide open spaces. The sun was high in the sky, and there was no breeze. The heat was stifling after a while. I started to get tired. Then my brother stopped suddenly. He was staring at something in the distance. "What are you looking at?" I asked. "That thing over there," he replied. The rice fields stretched as far as the eye could see, and the area was completely deserted. I squinted my eyes, but I couldn't make out what it was. Far away, across the fields, there was this white thing, about the size of a person. It was moving and wriggling as if it was fluttering in the breeze. "Maybe it's a ScareKrow," I said. "That's not a ScareKrow," my brother replied. "ScareKrows don't move like that." "Maybe it's a sheet then," I said. "No, it's not a sheet," he replied. "There are no other houses around here. Besides, there's no wind. But it's still moving and wriggling. The heck is that thing?" I had a strange and uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. My brother ran back to the house, and when he returned, he was carrying a pair of binoculars. "Oh, can I see?" I said excitedly. I made a grab for the binoculars, but he pushed me back. "No, me first," he said with a chuckle. "I'm the oldest. You can have a look when I'm done." As soon as my brother put the binoculars up to his eyes, I noticed his expression suddenly changed. His face grew pale, and he broke out into a cold sweat. He dropped the binoculars to the ground, and I could see the fear in his eyes. "What was it?" I asked nervously. My brother replied slowly, "There it is. There it is. There it is." It was not my brother's voice. Without another word, he turned and started walking back to the house. Something didn't feel right. With trembling hands, I bent down and picked up the binoculars, but I was too scared to look through them. In the distance, the white object was still twisting and turning. Just then, my grandfather came running over. "What are you doing with those binoculars?" he asked. "Nothing," I replied. "Just looking at that white thing over there." "What?" he shouted. "You shouldn't look at that." He snatched the binoculars from my grasp. "Did you see it?" he demanded angrily. "Did you look through the binoculars?" "No," I said in a meek voice. "Not yet." My grandfather sighed with relief. "Good," he said. "That's good." Without knowing why, I was sent back to the house. When I walked into the kitchen, everyone was crying. My brother was rolling around on the ground, laughing like a crazy person. He was on his back and his body was wriggling and twisting, just like that white thing in the distance. I couldn't understand what was going on. It was horrible to see him like that. I burst into tears myself. He wasn't my brother anymore. He had completely lost his mind. The next day, my parents decided to take us home. My grandmother and grandfather stood on their porch, waving sadly to us as the car pulled away. I sat in the back seat with my brother, wiping the tears from my eyes. My brother was still laughing like a mental patient. They had to tie him up to stop him from moving around. His face was twisted into a wide smile. He looked like he was happy, but when I saw his eyes, I realized he was crying. It sent a chill down my spine. His cheeks were wet with tears, but he just kept laughing and laughing. My father pulled over to the side of the road and got out of the car. He took out the binoculars and furiously smashed him on the street. Then, without saying anything, he got back into the car and kept driving. Another Japanese man tells his experience with the twister kun-kun when he was a young boy. When I was a little boy, I lived in a small town by the seashore in Chiba Prefecture. One evening, my uncle took me for a walk on the beach. As we strolled down the strand, I looked out to the sea and noticed something white in the distance. It was a long thing, swaying back and forth. I wondered what it could be. "What's that thing in the sea?" I asked my uncle. He gazed at it, and I saw his eyes grow wide, and his face turn pale. There was a terrified look in his eyes. He couldn't stop staring at it. "Run for your life!" he shouted frantically. I didn't know what was going on, but I was scared, so I ran back home and told my grandfather. He went pale. "That's a kun-kun," he said. "You're lucky to get away from it. You should never look directly at it." "Where's your uncle?" "He's still at the seashore," I replied, my voice shaking. "I've got to rescue my son," my grandfather said as he took off as fast as he could to the seashore. I followed close behind him, worried and frightened. From a distance, I could see my uncle standing on the beach. It was as if he was frozen on the spot, staring at the white meandering thing far out to sea. My grandfather broke a branch off the tree and approached my uncle, muttering some kind of prayer under his breath. He kept his eyes cast down, careful not to look at the white thing. My grandfather managed to drag my uncle away and brought him home. Although my uncle was saved, he suffered from fits of madness and insanity the rest of his life. Since it happened, he has been in and out of mental homes many times. He was never the same after that.
The Kuchisaka Onna, also known as the Slit-Mouthed Woman, is a scary Japanese urban legend about a disfigured Japanese woman who brandishes large scissors and preys on children. She has an enormous slit mouth which extends from ear to ear in a horrible permanent smile. The Slit-Mouthed Woman walks the streets of Japan wearing a surgical mask and hunting for children. If you cross her path, she will stop you and ask you a question. If you give her the wrong answer, there will be horrible consequences. Picture the scene. You are walking home from school and your path takes you down a deserted city street. Suddenly, you hear a faint noise coming from the shadows. You glance over and see a beautiful woman standing there. She has long black hair and is wearing a beige trench coat. A surgical mask covers the lower half of her face. In Japan, wearing a surgical mask is not uncommon during flu season to prevent spreading germs. She steps out of the shadows and blocks your path. "Am I beautiful?" she asks. Before he can answer, she tears off her mask, revealing a hideously deformed face. Her huge mouth is sliced from ear to ear and gapes open, revealing rows of sharp teeth and a big red, disgusting tongue twisting and twirling inside. "Am I beautiful now?" she screams. Terrified, you struggle to answer her. If you say no, she pulls out a huge pair of scissors and kills you immediately, chopping off your head. If you say yes, she takes her scissors and slices your mouth from ear to ear, making you look just like her. If you try to run away, she will hunt you down and kill you by slicing you in two. The only way to escape from Kuchisaka Anna is to give a non-committed answer. If you say you look average or you look normal, she will be confused, giving you just enough time to run away. There are many rumors about how Kuchisaka Anna got her horrible disfigured mouth. Some say that her slit mouth is a result of plastic surgery that went horribly wrong. Others say that she was injured in a terrible car crash. Some even believe that she is an escaped mental patient who was so demented that she cut her own mouth apart. According to one legend, years ago in Japan, there lived a very beautiful woman who was extremely vain and self-absorbed. Her husband was a very jealous and brutal man, and he became convinced that she was cheating on him. In a fit of rage, he took a sword and slit her mouth from ear to ear, screaming, "Who will think you're beautiful now?" She became a vengeful spirit and began walking the streets of Japan wearing a surgical mask to hide her terrible scars. The slit-mouthed woman's reign of terror began in the spring and summer of 1979 when rumors began to spread throughout Japan about sightings of the Kuchisaka Anna hunting down children. The story spread like wildfire and actually created scares in many towns. Police increased their patrols and schools sent teachers to walk students home in groups. In 2004, South Korea was plagued by reports of a red-masked woman who was chasing children. In 2007, a coroner found some old records from the late 70s about a woman who was chasing little children but was hit by a car and died shortly after. Her mouth was ripped from ear to ear. The US had its own version of Kuchisaka Anna. There were rumors about a clown who appeared in public bathrooms and accosted children, asking, "Do you want death or a happy smile?" If they chose happy smile, he took out a knife and slit their mouth from ear to ear.